Welcome to Jews, God, and History. You know, for more than 2,000 years, people have opened the book of Daniel looking for clues about the end of the world. And every generation has found itself somewhere in Daniel's visions. Think about it. Maybe Daniel was talking about the Romans or the Crusades. Or how about Napoleon? Maybe Hitler or the European Union. How about the Cold War or the Soviet Union? How about microchips and artificial intelligence? And today, well, many believe that Daniel is describing our own century. But what if almost everybody's been asking the wrong question? What if Daniel wasn't primarily trying to reveal our future, but his own present? Well, today we're exploring one of the most important conclusions of modern biblical scholarship. You see, according to the overwhelming majority of historians, including many deeply religious Jewish and Christian scholars, the book of Daniel isn't about a supernatural roadmap of the 21st century or geopolitics. No, it's a brilliant, courageous work of resistance literature written during the darkest years of Jewish history, when Judea stood on the edge of annihilation. Its predictions point with astonishing precision to one man. Not Nero, not Hitler, not even the Antichrist, but someone called Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Who's that? Antiochus Epiphanes. And its climax isn't Armageddon. It's the Maccabean Revolt. Ever hear of that? The Maccabean Revolt. Now let's see why. Let's consider the puzzle of Daniel. Daniel, the book of Daniel, is unlike almost anything else in the Hebrew Bible. Half of it consists of memorable court stories. Daniel survives the lions. His friends survive the fiery furnace. A mysterious hand writes upon a palace wall. And these stories probably circulated for generations before the final book was compiled. But beginning in chapter 7, everything changes. Suddenly, we enter an extraordinary universe filled with some very interesting things. We've got monsters emerging from the sea, angels interpreting dreams, symbolic numbers, heavenly courts, cosmic battles, and we have mysterious kingdoms stretching across history. Wow, this is the birth of what we call Jewish apocalyptic literature. It's a whole new kind of prophecy, not classical prophecy at all, not like Isaiah, Jeremiah. No, this is apocalyptic. You see, earlier biblical prophets addressed their own generation. Isaiah confronted kings. Jeremiah warned Jerusalem. Amos challenged social injustice. Daniel does something really different. He writes as though he lived centuries earlier during the Babylonian exile. His hero serves Babylonian King Nebuchadnezzar. He interprets dreams for Belshazzar. He survives under Darius the Mede. And from that supposedly 6th century perspective, Daniel predicts the rise and fall of future empires. But here's the fascinating part. Those predictions become increasingly detailed until they suddenly stop being accurate. Why? Well, that question unlocks the whole book. Let's consider 4 strange kingdoms. Daniel's famous vision describes 4 successive empires. King Nebuchadnezzar dreams of an enormous statue, a head of gold, chest of silver, a bronze belly, iron legs, and feet of iron mixed with clay. Later, Daniel sees the same kingdoms again, this time as terrifying beasts rising from the sea. There's a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a terrifying fourth beast unlike anything before it. Finally, God establishes an eternal kingdom. Now, throughout Jewish history, interpreters have debated those empires. But within the historical setting of the 2nd century before the Common Era, they fit pretty well. Babylon, Media, Persia, and fourthly, the Greek Empire founded by Alexander the Great. The focus quickly narrows. Daniel isn't really interested in Babylon anymore. He becomes obsessed with what happened after Alexander. That was when everything changed. See, Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in just a few years. When he died unexpectedly in 323 BCE, what happened to his empire? Shattered in pieces. His generals divided up everything. And Daniel describes exactly this.
The goat became exceedingly great, but at the height of his power, the great horn was broken, and in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven.
Alexander the Great is the great horn. His generals are the 4 horns. This isn't controversial. Even the angel Gabriel explains it.
The 2-horned ram that you saw signifies the kings of Media and Persia, and the buck, the he-goat, the king of Greece, and the large horn on his forehead, that is the first king.
The symbolism suddenly becomes historical. Daniel isn't just speaking vaguely anymore. He names Greece directly. Then comes the little horn.
While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully.
Think about that. The little horn, this ruler, according to Daniel, becomes arrogant. He attacks God's people, abolishes sacrifice, he desecrates the temple, persecutes the faithful, and exalts himself above every god. Well, who is this? Well, the answer is remarkably clear. Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Ever hear of him? There was a historical crisis that broke out around 167 before the Common Era. This same Antiochus attempted something unprecedented. Instead of just ruling Judea politically, he tried to erase Jewish identity itself. Circumcision became illegal. Torah observance became illegal. Sabbath observance became illegal. Copies of Scripture were destroyed. The temple was transformed into a pagan sanctuary. Now, according to the book of 1st Maccabees, sacrifices to Zeus replaced Israel's traditional worship. Think about that. For Jews living through these events, it was like the end of history. Daniel is speaking directly into that nightmare. And maybe Daniel's most famous phrase is the abomination that makes desolate. For centuries, readers have searched for future fulfillments of this. And yet, for Jews living in the 2nd century BCE, the meaning was immediate. King Antiochus, erected a pagan altar inside the Jerusalem temple. He sacrificed unclean animals there. The temple, the center of the Jewish universe, had been defiled. Daniel transforms this political catastrophe into cosmic symbolism. History and heaven become one. Why does Daniel get so accurate? Well, here's where historians become fascinated. Chapter 11 of the book reads almost like a history textbook. Kings move north and south. Political alliances shift. Wars erupt. Royal marriages fail. Egypt and Syria battle repeatedly. Every event corresponds remarkably well with conflicts between the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria. South and north. North against south. Seleucids versus Ptolemies. Back and forth. The details are astounding. And scholars can often identify individual rulers, specific military campaigns, even diplomatic marriages. It's one of the most historically precise chapters in the Hebrew Bible. And then something unexpected happens. Beginning around verse 40, same chapter, Daniel suddenly predicts events that never occur. Antiochus is expected to invade Egypt once more. He's expected to perish in Palestine. God's kingdom is expected immediately afterward. Well, I'm sorry, none of that happened. Antiochus died in Persia. The resurrection of the faithful did not arrive. History continued. Well, why the abrupt change? Well, there's a clue that scholars just couldn't ignore. If Daniel had truly been written during the Babylonian exile, well, all of chapter 11 should have been equally miraculous. But instead, the predictions become less accurate precisely when they move beyond the author's own lifetime. This phenomenon has a name. We can call it prophecy after the fact. In Latin, Vaticinium ex eventu. Try saying that after you've had a couple of whiskeys. Ancient writers frequently described recent history as though it had been predicted centuries earlier. Wasn't fraud, it was literary strategy. See, by placing the narrative in the mouth of an ancient sage, the author proclaimed that God had controlled history all along. Daniel fits this pattern remarkably well. And he offers hope during persecution. Just imagine being an observant, faithful Jew in 167 BCE. The temple has been desecrated. Friends are dying. Torah scrolls are burning. Everything sacred appears lost. And Daniel announces,
This has all been foreseen. The beasts are temporary. The kingdoms will fall. The arrogant king has only limited time. God still rules heaven. This is not mere prediction. It is resistance. And the message is clear. Hold on. Do not compromise. History belongs to God.
Enter the Maccabees. You've heard of the Maccabees. While Daniel offered hope, another family chose action. A fellow named Mattathias and his sons, especially one son named Judas Maccabeus, Judah the Maccabee. They banded together and launched a revolt against Seleucid rule, against really impossible odds. They managed to recapture Jerusalem in the year 164 BCE. They purified the temple. The daily sacrifices resumed. The desecration ended. And today, Jews celebrate this victory every year. It's called, of course, Chanukah or Hanukkah. Although Daniel never mentions Judas Maccabeus by name, his visions prepared readers to understand the struggle. The conflict wasn't just political, it was cosmic. Because Daniel also contains something quite revolutionary. For one of the first times in the Hebrew Bible, we encounter a clear hope of bodily resurrection.
Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever.
Why here? Because persecution raises difficult questions. What happens to righteous people murdered for remaining faithful? Well, if justice doesn't arrive in this life, well, maybe God will establish it beyond death. The Maccabean crisis transformed Jewish philosophy, Jewish theology forever. This creates another fascinating question. Meet Jesus of Nazareth, who speaks of the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. We're talking New Testament here. Does that mean Daniel was really predicting the Roman destruction of Jerusalem? Well, not necessarily. Jewish teachers often reused earlier scripture to describe new crises. Just as Antiochus desecrated the temple, Rome would do something horrifying centuries later. Daniel's imagery became reusable. History repeated itself. The pattern mattered more than the original historical setting. So, why has Daniel continued inspiring end times speculation? Because the book deliberately operates on two levels. Historically, it addressed the Maccabean crisis and the Maccabean Revolt. Theologically, its symbols are really timeless because every generation recognizes arrogant rulers. Empires still rise, empires still fall. Faithful communities still face persecution. The beasts never completely disappear. Daniel's images continue speaking precisely because they emerged from one of history's greatest moments of crisis. You know, reading Daniel within the world of the Maccabees doesn't really diminish the book at all. It actually makes it more powerful. Instead of treating it as a cryptic puzzle about modern geopolitics, we encounter something deeply human. A Jewish community facing extinction. A writer refusing despair. A declaration that tyranny never has the final word. That message has echoed across Jewish history ever since. From Antiochus to Rome, to medieval expulsions of Jews all across Europe, to the Shoah, the Holocaust. Daniel continues reminding Jews that even when history appears ruled by beasts, God remains seated upon the heavenly throne. The book of Daniel isn't primarily a code book for predicting tomorrow's headlines. No, it's the story of one of Judaism's greatest moments of courage. It reveals how Jews under Antiochus IV interpreted their suffering, how they found hope in the midst of persecution, and how the Maccabean Revolt became not just a military victory, but the fulfillment of a divine vision. Understanding Daniel in its historical context doesn't rob it of meaning. Instead, it restores the world in which it was born. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. Before asking what Scripture says about us, we should first ask what it meant to those who first heard it. Because only then can we appreciate why Daniel has remained one of the most influential books ever written. Not because it predicts every future war, but because it reveals how faith can endure even when history seems to belong to the beasts. Well, if you enjoyed this exploration into Jewish history and biblical scholarship, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again on Jews, God, and History, where the ancient world is never quite as distant as it seems.